Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are discussing core concepts, and I am your friend and your tour guide on this amazing, fun, and very learning based journey, Siddhi Bhattacharyya. Now, we've been discussing the most intrinsic part, if you can call it the soul of marketing, which is marketing communications. Now, within marketing communications, we've discussed how marketing communications is important, what kind of rules apply to ensure that your communication is understood well, what all factors are important to ensure that people receive your communications in the proper way. And you have to also look at now the ways and formats to ensure that your objectives, whatever your organization's needs are, those are completely serviced by the entire communications journey. So, in the words of Dominic Walters, I'll just leave these with you that marketing communications is not a nice to have, it is a must have, and that we have to constantly, as marketing communications marketers, learn how to talk with our consumers because the answers lie exactly there. If we do not do that enough, the communication will not transfer from one to the other, and you will not have the right kind of feedback and the objectives will not be met. So, communication objective setting is very important in the entire series of marketing communication activities in an organization, and that is what we will get into in detail in today's discussion. Now, understand how marketing communication strategy is critical for an organization. Effective marketing communications are essential, and these help build a brand's awareness because that is the first part. If you remember the IDA model, we've talked about the awareness, the interest, the desire, and finally the action, which propels a person who is not fully informed about the brand to reach inside the brand's personal space and act upon, which is where the purchases and the revenue generation really happen. So, awareness, then you foster various customer preferences, the interest gets developed, and then finally you have desire, which drives action. So, you finally end up buying into the products and therefore into the brand. So, this creates the funnel through which the audiences are ushered into the brand's experiential space, and that is where we will take you through this conversation. So, this presentation explores the key decisions because a lot of times marketers have to take these calls. They have to understand how this will impact the actual exercise of marketing, and therefore communications becomes key to achieving those particular objectives. And therefore, you'll have to set up your communication objectives first. You'll establish the benchmarks because this is what you want to achieve, and this is how you have to set out in the entire task to achieve those particular benchmarks, and determine the appropriate budgets because there is a certain cost involved, a certain exercise to fuel that particular activity so that your marketing campaigns can actually create the kind of magic that you intended for them. We'll examine how successful marketers align their communication strategies with overall business goals and measure effectiveness through concrete metrics and optimize resource allocation for maximizing the impact in marketing communications. So, when we see marketing, there are three pillars to establish the communication objectives. At the base is the awareness aspect. We've discussed the reach, frequency, the earlier metrics that were used. So, awareness is at the absolute entry level core of what marketing communications should create. It should create brand recognition. That is the first, foremost, and most important push that marketing communication does for any brand or any product. Then it sways consumer it sways customer opinion and creates preference for a particular product or brand and pushes away whatever competition lies in that particular space. So it builds favorable attitudes, and these favorable attitudes then result in a continuous stay with the brand, and it also fosters the lifetime value from that particular prospect or customer and propels them to act. It propels them to buy in. It motivates their purchase decisions and gets them to become part of the folds of the brand. So communication objectives form a complete hierarchy in this way, and awareness serves as the foundation upon which the entire preference will then be built. You will have interest first, which will lead you into desire, and from there you will get into action. So awareness is the first which leads into interest, then to desire, and finally into action. And ultimately, this will create that particular journey for the customer. Each level requires different messaging strategies and metrics to measure how effectively they are being run. Awareness-focused campaigns emphasize visibility and recall. Preference-building messages highlight competitive advantages, and action-oriented communications provide specific incentives and reasons to buy, or as we call them in advertising language, RTBs for short, reasons to buy. So therefore, these are the progressive paths, the milestones in the communication journey. The key decisions that happen in communication planning: first, you define the communication focus. What is the general direction that you're going to define when it comes to taking up a particular activity in marketing? So you're going to create awareness, you're going to build preference or incite action, like we discussed in the framework. And then you set benchmarks. What is the kind of activity output that you want to achieve and measure? So establish quantitative goals and time frames for measuring these successes. We've talked about SMART objectives. So SMART objectives are part of these benchmarks because they actually help you simplify, get measurable, actionable, and result-oriented time-bound goals, which give you that SMART objective setting, and they also give you an indication of the communication budget, because the activities themselves, they will cost you. So therefore, you allocate your resources to support objectives efficiently. The objectives and the budget will also be linked to the ROI, which is the return on investment, or the ROAS if it's advertising spends. So successful marketing communication requires this strategic alignment across these three critical decision points like we discussed, and the process begins with clearly articulating what the communication aims to accomplish, followed by establishing concrete metrics to gauge the success, and concludes with the appropriate resource allocation, and it helps you achieve the defined objectives. Now, how do you go about creating brand awareness, which is at the basal level of the entire activity? You create brand recognition. People must recognize the brand, and it must have an automatic next level association with brand recall. So how does association happen? When you recognize as a consumer that you identify the brand when presented with it. And this is crucial at any point of purchase because it has to be preferably unaided. If there is unaided recall, that means the brand is visible, it is recognized, and the target audience has received your communication in the past sufficiently well enough for them to recognize who you are and what you stand for. The association is exactly what you stand for aspect comes in. The consumer's ability to retrieve the brand from memory, and this is essential for decision making outside of retail environments because they will continuously get stoked by the brand recall aspects. And then you have primary versus selective demand for your particular brand. So both aspects need to be taken into consideration. You're stimulating awareness of the need category versus the awareness of specific brand offerings. So it has to move beyond just being a need, and it has to actually align with the specific brand offerings. That's the shift you want to execute. Brand awareness forms the foundation for all customer interactions. Recognition is generally easier to achieve than recall, because recall is often more valuable. If they're able to recall who you are, they have associations built around the brand in their minds, and that really helps them remember what you stand for, your purpose as well. So the strategic choice between emphasizing category need, which is the primary demand, versus brand specific benefits, which is the selective demand in this case, it depends on how mature the market is, how well have you already been received, how much competition is already there in that space, and how well informed the consumer is on all of these things vis-a-vis whatever else is there. So this is where the progression of the entire conversation goes towards. Now, recognition versus recall, how do you identify the strategic differences between the two? When it comes to brand recognition, recognition occurs when consumers can identify the brand and they encounter it physically, and so they can tell exactly what is it that it is being accosted with. And this showcases especially important inputs at the point of purchase, because that is when the wallet is opening up, that is when the transaction will happen, that is exactly when the customer will choose whether you are going to come into their homestead or some other competitive brand is going to take your place. This is, for example, Stauffer's distinctive orange packaging being recognized in the frozen food aisle, and that actually helps the brand define its particular space in the consumer's mind. Now, recall happens when consumers can retrieve the brand from memory without any physical cues, and this is on their own volition as well. And this is again very crucial for purchase decisions, because the purchase decision does not really happen only at the point of purchase. You are preconditioned with your experiences. Maybe your day has started with that need formulating in your mind, and it actually becomes more and more manifest and concrete by the time you've actually reached the point of sale. Here, the purchase decision is made away from the retail environment, maybe at a completely different space where your mind is regurgitating the information and driving towards that particular purchase moment. It is creating a shopping list, for example, at home, or recommending brands to others. You are not only creating the purchase intent yourself, at times you are helping create the purchase intent for others by passing information and recommendations, which is also in the form of word of mouth. So all of this is actually going, and it's conversation, it's talk. So that is exactly why I said talk before you lose the customer. So strategic emphasis on recognition versus recall depends largely on where the consumer makes the purchase decision for your category, and brands that are primarily purchased on impulse buying benefit more from recognition strategies, while those requiring pre-purchase planning should focus on recall. The integration into the purchasing process therefore becomes paramount, and brands need to understand how complex the decision making is. If it is a candy, it is probably a recognition game. If it is a car, it is probably a recall game. Then you have to build brand preferences as well. You have to pass the knowledge and information along. So you have to communicate benefits. How you do that is highlight how the offering meets the consumer needs and pips whatever else is there in the competition space. It creates a positive attitude and fosters favorable feelings towards the brand vis-a-vis the competition that is available. Also, as it goes along, it establishes a necessary conviction that when you compare versus competition, you're actually trying to create a reason to select your brand over whatever else is available in the category. And therefore, it builds the confidence in your brand superiority, and that is the other stage which pushes you as a consumer towards conviction. You also reinforce that particular choice by existing customers of their decision. So you reassure yourself as well as others, and it establishes a compelling reason to buy. And this RTB is you telling yourself why your choice is correct, and it pushes away buyer's remorse, because this is what you want to drive away from your particular brand's space. So, building preference requires addressing both the rational and the emotional aspects of the entire product and consumer decision making. Effective preference building communicates and highlights how an offering's ability is there to solve problems, which are the negative needs, and provide pleasure, which are positive needs. Comparative messaging can be particularly effective when consumers are processing information analytically. But do remember that at the end, like how we discussed in the Dove example for real beauty previously, the beauty standards are too high and too pressured for women, and because they are so, women hardly consider, about 2% only consider themselves beautiful. So that is truly the insight. The insight that only 2% women consider themselves beautiful. So how does that translate? It translates into two different parts. One is the fear part and one is the desire part. So both of these aspects get translated. In the fear part is the stigma, where not beautiful is a tag which women want to avoid. On the other side, there is a desire where there is an accolade that women will be seen as beautiful despite it all. And when I say it all, I mean the beauty standards of society, the way their body type is, the way they look, their facial construct, skin, pigmentation, broken teeth, fallen hair, all of it. Beauty is a sense of perception. And that is where the desire to be looked at as beautiful really germinates from. So, women who can actually achieve that level of beauty is where their confidence will also find their desire moving towards. Now, you understand consumer needs, and consumer needs actually, when crafted well, will give you the insights like we've just discussed. You remove a standing problem because that problem is the irking, the niggling little thorn in people's sides. And once you've eliminated that through your product, your service, your presence as a brand, your understanding of the consumer's need, therefore you've made friends with the consumer. And that is where critically communication comes into play. And there are ways you avoid the problem also before it even sets in. Here you prevent potential problems before they even turn up, and then you become a bigger friend, confidant, and enabler of their needs. There is a sensory gratification. Whatever you've built in into your product, if you're able to convey that through your communication, you're appealing to the senses and you're ensuring that people almost experience the product even before they have purchased it. And if it gets social approval, then automatically it means that they are not alone. People do not like to be alone. We are all social creatures. So at the end of the day, we seek strength in numbers. We seek the ability to be called part of one particular herd, tribe, family, clan, what have you. So that is why social approval is something that we always continually seek. And then there is intellectual stimulation, because finally all of it that I have done, it should give me a sense of relaxation, it should give me a sense of achievement. So satisfying whatever curiosity or learning needs I had, if they are actually completed, then I have felt that what decision I took, it was basis my ability to appraise whatever choices were there available in front of me, and I have taken the right decision given all that I came to know. So effective preference building communication aligns with specific consumer needs. Negative needs need focus on eliminating problems, while positive needs emphasize pleasure, social connection, or intellectual growth. And understanding which need states are most relevant for your target audience It is essential to know all this so that your compelling messages are crafted and they resonate. They really strike a chord with the end consumer. There are various types of persuasive communication. One way is a comparative piece, whereas the other could be a reinforcement piece. Now, where you have comparative communication, you explicitly compare the attributes of two or more brands. You highlight the differences and advantages of one product vis-a-vis the other product. Most effective when it activates both cognitive and emotional motivations simultaneously. The human brain has a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is analytical, it will always have logic, and the right hemisphere is creative. So, it will always have emotion. Your messaging, if powerful enough, will build a bridge between both, and it will touch base with the consumer's mind completely and convince them that both these aspects are covered, and it gives them the reassurance that their choice is the right one, and that is how it proceeds. So, here Chrysler's Dodge Ram, for example, explicitly compares horsepower and warranty against the Ford F-150, and this sort of exemplifies this particular comparative approach. And on the other side, when you are looking at reinforcing communication, you are looking at convincing current customers that they have already made the right choice and they must repeat that particular purchase. So, this comes in post-purchase dissonance and builds loyalty. At automobile ads showing satisfied owners enjoying special features of their new car are classic examples of reinforcement communication. This also in today's digital age can be seen very, very vehemently used as testimonials. And nowadays, less addy and more real communication is being looked at. The addy communication is being looked down upon. So, this is the transition in the formats of communication that you will see today. Both approaches serve different strategic purposes in the consumer journey. Comparative communication works best for customer acquisition and competitive differentiation, whereas reinforcement communication excels at retention, loyalty building, and yes, action. So, you want people to take action at this point in time. The most sophisticated campaigns often incorporate elements from both approaches at different touch points, and it sets the need out so that once the need is set out, they solve the need and they bring the consumer and their investment home, which leads us to how you incite consumer action. Inciting consumer action is the end point to which communication takes the consumer. So, here you will see creating a mental commitment first and foremost, because this encourages consumers to imagine themselves using the product, because the moment they are in the same space, they feel it is part of their natural environment. It is safe to be in the space with the product and think of it as part of their own lives. Then you provide them with certain incentives like a promotional deal, coupons, or limited time offers that reduce the negativity or reduce the chances of denial. You remove any other barriers also, like any potential obstacles to purchase through guarantees or easy return policies that ensure that their money invested will not go to waste. And finally, you pump up the urgency. You give them limited time nature of offers and limited availability, pushing them to go for the purchase now. So, action focused communication aims to convert interest into purchase behavior. It recognizes that at any given moment, only a small percentage of consumers are actively in the market for a particular product category. So, when let us say this is the entire funnel of how communication works, at the larger outside, there are the fence sitters who will be drawn in at the awareness level. and then they will get certain interest, so they will learn more about the product. Then you will have certain people who desire it, which will finally push them towards a certain point where there is action. And once they stay with you and they continuously come back for this exact same experience, is where you will find loyalty. So these are the levels of discussion within the IDA model. You will see that approximately 20% for detergent, 2% for carpet cleaners, and 0.25% for automobiles happen in a typical week when it comes to action takers. How do you analyze the current marketing situation? You assess the product life cycle stage. You ensure that whether your product is new, growing, mature, or declining, this will automatically give you the levels of exposure which your particular product or brand currently enjoys. If it is new, you will have to move more towards the awareness part. If it is declining, you will have to actually bring it back into the interest and desire space. If it is mature, you will have to consistently push people towards action. You evaluate your market position, you analyze your market share relative to competition and see what particular stage you are in vis-a-vis whatever else is available in the market. And then you understand how the consumer is positioned in their own mind when it comes to you and your product or brand. So you measure the current levels of awareness, trial, satisfaction, and basis that you come to your decision on objectives. You identify the product's ability to differentiate at a certain point, and you assert this uniqueness compared to competing offerings that are available in the market. At times, you will have a product differentiator which you can call as a unique selling proposition or USP. If you have multiple, you can have multi selling proposition or MSP. But the fun part begins here when it's like a luxury product where it's all about the experience, it's all about the kind of feel that you're going to leave behind as an end result. And there is nothing really which can set one apart from the other, but the audience can swing into another space who has similar offerings just because their experience looks better. Here you can create something which sticks with them for longer, called a single minded proposition or SMP. So all these factors can be brought into play. As communicators, you can build these into your messaging formats. So communication objectives should emerge from a thorough analysis of the current marketing situation. Mature product categories where the company leads the market but usage is low, the objective might focus on stimulating more frequent usage, hence pushing them towards action. And for new categories, the company trails the leader but offers a superior product. The objective might emphasize convincing consumers of the brand's superiority. So, A, I, D, in this case the D and A. So, these are the parts of the IDA model which will take priority in each scenario. Consumer state analysis, brand A versus brand B. Let's say the awareness is compared to the satisfaction and you trial brand A and brand B. Consumer state analysis reveals dramatically different situations for brand A and brand B, requiring distinct communication approaches. Brand A has, let's say, strong awareness, which is about 80%. This is where brand A is, and trial, which is, say, at 60%. Whereas poor satisfaction, which is about 20%, indicating there is a potential product quality issue because people know of it, people have tried it out but don't really like it. In contrast, brand B has limited awareness, about 40%, but excellent satisfaction at about 80%. So even limited number of people having tried it have actually found it to be great. So this is the report suggesting that its communication strategy should focus on increasing awareness and encouraging trials. Now, the communication funnel that we were talking about has its inherent challenges. So, brand A in this case will have a challenge of product improvement. They will have to go back to the drawing board with 80% awareness, but only 20% satisfaction amongst people who try it. You put in more advertising, it's the fastest way to kill that particular brand. So, brand A faces a product quality issue rather than a communication problem. The investment priority therefore should shift from marketing to product development and address fundamental satisfaction issues, maybe do some consumer research and product testing to ensure that whatever you are coming up with can be used to scale further communication efforts, and it really brings about the satisfaction you were looking for. And in the case of brand B, if you have only 40% awareness but 80% satisfaction amongst them, brand B has an excellent product that remains undiscovered. So, here you should prioritize awareness building and trial generation to introduce more consumers to this highly satisfying product, put in more RTBs, put in more testimonials here, and increase the frequency and reach. These contrasting scenarios demonstrate how consumer state analysis should drive your continuous communication strategy. Investment should actually flow to address the weakest link, in this case product, in this case visibility, and it should therefore create the points in the marketing funnel, whether it's awareness, trial or satisfaction, rather than applying a one size fits all approach towards communication, because that won't be too healthy. Now, let's talk about setting quantitative benchmarks. Now, let's say you've set a benchmark of creating awareness, a target at about 40% of where you want to be for a new James Bond movie amongst your target audience, here in this case millennials. Now, if they want to see 30% preference growth for this, you increase in whitening power perception for toothpaste. So, this is the preference growth. This is another example of how you can set a benchmark for toothpaste. If you want to see action increase, you can look at about 15% growth in conversion rates from communication and see how action has actually been affected by communication. And if there is a reach goal, you want to reach a certain number of people, 12 million people is the kind of reach you want, where unique customers have been exposed to the campaign with obviously a certain frequency, preferably 3. So, this is the kind of frequency which typically good campaigns are able to reach if you have the budgets for them. The quantitative benchmarks provide specific measurable goals that define success for a communication campaign. They transform abstract objectives like building awareness into concrete targets such as achieve 40% awareness amongst millennials. Now, build awareness could be a two-word brief, but you actually translate it into 40% awareness in a researched pool of millennials, and that gives you a quantified project objective to set. Now, these metrics enable marketers to design appropriate communication activities and properly evaluate how they have actually worked out or not. If you need to set temporal benchmarks, what kind of milestones are you setting and when will you reach them? Short-term goals could be 1 to 3 months, where you could have initial awareness building and early adoption incentives. Mid-term goals could be 3 to 6 months, where you create preference and you completely fight off competitive positioning. And then there are long-term goals which are about a year long, where you have sustained behavior change and loyalty building as the end result. So, temporal or time-based benchmarks establish the time frame within which the communication objectives must be achieved. They recognize different communication goals having different time horizons. You can't do complete sustained behavior change in just a month. Awareness can often be built relatively quickly, but preference formation, behavior change, they typically take way longer. So, connecting the quantitative goals with specific time frames creates the accountability and helps prioritize the kind of resources you need to see this through. Now, when you are talking about smart communication objectives, you, let's say, are talking about a movie premiere awareness. You are creating awareness for the new James Bond movie amongst 40% of millennials like we discussed. So here you represent a 15% increase from the previous film in the franchise. That is the shift that you have been able to execute. In the toothpaste brand perception example, we say a brand X toothpaste has superior whitening power from 10 to 40% in years. So the number of consumers who believe this has actually jumped. Again, you've got a quantifiable objective with quarterly measurement milestones of 20%, 25%, 30%, 40%. So this is how you actually map the increased acceptance of your brand over a certain set of temporal milestones. And then product trial generation, where you try a new energy drink. About 15% of health conscious consumers aged between 18 to 34 within 6 months of launch, and expect that at least 60% will report that there is satisfaction in having that after the first time they've drunk it. So well articulated communication objectives combine the focus, because you need to move in a specific direction with specific milestones and achieve a specific communication task. And quantitative benchmarks are also put in, which ensure the magnitude of the desired change is also captured. And then you've got temporal benchmarks, which show you the time frame for the achievement. And these are SMART objectives, which are specific. So you have to be specific in numbers. You have to have metrics, so they are measurable. They need to be achievable. They can't just be that from 10% you reach 100% in a month. So they have to be logical, they have to be achievable that way, and then relevant, because they have to have a direct impact for your business, and yes, of course, they have to be measurable in time. So these serve as both planning tools and evaluation criteria for communication campaigns. Now, with all this, you are determining finally how much you're going to spend for it, the communication budget. You assess a variety of budget factors. This is your question, therefore. What kind of product life cycle are you currently looking at? What is your differentiation when it comes to the market? How much market share do you have and how much you want to shift it to? And how complex is your message overall? The next part is then you apply the objective and task method to this. So you define these specific objectives, like you ask these questions, you identify the necessary tasks to reach those particular endpoints, and therefore you will have each particular campaign element, and therefore you also get the costs, because each will have media insertions, each will have creative pieces, each will have production value. All of these things will give you the cost which you have to expend to reach that particular end of your objective. When you optimize your resource allocation, you're ensuring marginal profit from communication equals or exceeds other marketing activities. You will continuously keep doing other marketing activities like segmentation, targeting, pricing, and a variety of things. So your communication has to ensure that the marginal profit which comes from communication actually gives you more if you had not done the communication altogether. Determining the right communication budget remains one of marketing's most challenging decisions, and department store magnate John Wanamaker famously noted, "I know that half of my advertising is wasted, but I don't know which half." So that is where the precision and the metricization and the measurement are extremely important to pin down. And the objective and task budgeting approach offers a practical solution, because it is connecting expenditures directly to specific goals and the required activities, and you can actually measure what is the resultant of each activity and where it took you from where you were to where you wanted to be. Now, communication budget, let's understand it by industry. Cosmetics has the highest when it comes to communication budgets, but industrial equipment has the lowest. So you've got other things packed into middle, consumer packaged goods, retail, automotive, they also come in the middle, but cosmetics easily have the highest, and they actually push a lot out there. Communication budgets vary dramatically across industries, reflecting the differences in the product life cycles, importantly, the competitive intensity, how many other players are also vying for the same attention of the consumer, and consumer decision making processes. High involvement consumer products like cosmetics often allocate up to 50% of their sales to communication, and industrial equipment manufacturers might just spend 5% because that is enough. There are only limited players because these are high-end buys. They will take long to actually discover, uh, finalize, and then go ahead for the purchase. And even within industries, companies adopt different spending approaches based on their market position and strategic objectives. So, which particular media makes what particular communication messaging, what particular kind of production value, all of these things are stressed upon and discussed by organizations. Here you've got objective and task budgeting. You define specific objectives, create measurable goals for awareness, preference, action, and you identify what particular required tasks are there which are needed to achieve each particular objective. You estimate what the task costs are, calculate the expenses for each required activity, and then you get your sum total budget of every single activity which you have measured for. And this aggregates into individual task costs into a total marketing budget and marketing communications budget in this case. Objective and task budgeting provides a logical, goal-oriented approach to setting communication expenditures rather than arbitrarily allocating funds based on previous year's competitive spending or available resources. This is more logical and step-based and metric-based. And this builds the budget from the ground up based on what needs are to be accomplished and what resources are required to achieve it. Now, there are certain problematic budget approaches as well. If you look at competitive parity budgeting, you'll simply match your competitor spending and ignore unique brand circumstances, objectives, and market opportunities, which may be to your favor also. Then there are affordable method budgeting, spending what we can afford. This treats communication as an expense rather than as an investment and leads to inconsistent funding and may not give you the desired results also, and there is a dissonance created. And in terms of percentage of sales budgeting, this again fixes a percentage of sales views communications as a result of revenue rather than as a driver of growth. Again, all first and foremost looking at communications as a cost rather than as an investment. And this problematic approach set has their logical flaws. Competitive parity assumes competitors know better than you do. Affordable methods create unstable funding and prevents long-term planning, and percentage of sales creates a downward spiral when sales actually start to fall. So each fails to connect spending directly to what your strategic objectives are and what market opportunities are available. All of these tend to end up becoming lazy, and these lazy excuses typically seldom work. Now, there are certain key factors which are affecting your budget decisions. Multiple factors influence appropriate communication budgets. New products typically require higher spending than established ones, and highly differentiated products may need less advertising than commodities. Market leaders often spend proportionally less than the challengers, and complex messages at times require more repetition than just the simple ones. So, niche audiences may cost more to reach effectively than mass markets. There are all of these key factors which a marketer has to think through before they come up with their answers. And product life cycle, like we discussed before, has also got an impact on budgets. If it's at the introduction stage, highest communication spending is required to build the awareness. If they're at the growth stage, you'll have to sustain the high spending to establish your market position and create a differentiated perspective. If they're at the maturity stage, you can spend moderately and spend focusing on the differentiation and the action parts. And if they're at the decline stage, reduce the spending and often focus on loyal customers who will give you the maximum value. So communication budgets typically followed a pattern aligned with the product life cycle, and new products require substantial investment to create awareness and encourage trial, exceeding often 50% of expected first-year sales. As these products mature, communication expenditures generally decline as a percentage of sales, and mature products typically require less aggressive spending to maintain their established positions. Now, the impact of product differentiation is where commoditized categories with minimal differentiation, for example, banks, airlines, beer, typically require higher communication spending to create the perceived differences and establish unique brand identities in consumers' minds. Highly differentiated products with clear, meaningful differences require proportionally less advertising to communicate their unique value proposition, as the distinctive benefits are more easily communicated and remembered. And when you're creating perceived differentiation, because you are forcing the differentiation into people's minds, you are trying to create more than just the physical differentiation, and this works best in the case of services also. Successful marketers create the psychological differentiation, which is what we talked about, the single-minded proposition, and you really have no USP or MSP. And this happens through branding, through packaging, through emotional appeals, requiring sustained communication investment over time. When you look at market share considerations, you will see that market leaders typically benefit from economies of scale in their communication spending because they've already reached that particular pole position. Here, they require proportionally less investment as a percentage of their sales to maintain their position. Challengers seeking to build share often spend significantly higher relatively to gain attention and disrupt the established purchasing patterns. This creates a particular challenge for new market entrants who must invest heavily in communication despite their smaller revenue base. This is what is also known as the first mover advantage. Whoever has come and moved in first, they have the least amount of spending to do because they've had a longer stay at the wicket and people know them more for what they offer. And then if there is a niche specialist, for example, they will have to spend lesser because their audience requirements and their communication requirements both are small. If there is a mid-tier player, they will spend little higher than niche players because they have a slightly wider swath. And then if you've got market challenger, in both cases you will see that they are spending very high depending on which level of challenge they are throwing at the main market leader, right? Now, what is the role of message complexity? If you simplify your messages rather than something which is very, very complex, then you will have simple, straightforward messages requiring fewer exposures for people to understand. And if you create complex messages where a lot of points are there, then if you get these across, complex messages with multiple benefits or technical information will require more exposures for sure. And this will require the same level of understanding to be achieved over multiple iterations. So, repetitions are required and the direct impact of the communication budget is seen. Complex messaging will require 3 to 5 times more exposures than regular ones. So, products with easily understood benefits often achieve communication objectives with lower frequency, reducing the overall budget requirements. And messaging complexity significantly impacts media frequency and overall communication budget. So, this is higher on frequency and this is lower on the frequency for sure. Now, if you have got the target audience reach considerations, how big is your target audience, how far away are they located, how much do you have to spend towards? Mass audiences are broadly defined target audiences and can often be reached efficiently through mass media, and you will have lower cost per thousand impressions, the CPM or cost per milieu. Milieu is a French term meaning 1000. But potentially higher total spending because you will have to reach that wider amount of people. So, the audience size will create a huge amount of spend any which ways. If you've got niche audiences, your specialized audiences may require targeted media vehicles with higher cost per thousand but lower total spending due to audience size. Precision typically comes at a premium because the more number of filters you put in, that actually helps you go very, very focused, and laser focus requires a lot of filters as well. If you've got digital targeting, advanced targeting capabilities allow for reaching specific audiences with minimal waste, and it gives you potentially reduces the overall spending while increasing relevance and effectiveness. And also, what kind of geography are you spreading your conversation around? So, that will give you the idea of how you're reaching consumers in multiple markets, and that may again have an impact on the costs as well, especially when the messaging must be adapted for different regions or cultures, whether it is in vernacular or it has different financial considerations or it has different offers. So, all of these factors will create multiple variants of the messaging, and hence it will increase the cost as well. And the accessibility of your target audience significantly also impacts the communication budgeting. If they've got a handheld phone, you might want to try digital. If they do not, you will have to go in through traditional. So, hard to reach consumers when, due to media habits, geographic dispersion, or specialized interests, typically require a higher relative spending to achieve communication frequency and coverage. Frequency and coverage here being reach. So, both these factors start to come into play. And when you look at your competitive communication environment, in markets with numerous competitors and high overall communication spending, brands must advertise more heavily to break through the clutter and be heard. Every communications not directly competitive to your brand create background noise, and that necessitates increased frequency and impact, because it actually shifts the consumer mindset from what is relevant to irrelevant stuff. And so, therefore, competitive analysis should examine not just direct competitors, but overall communication density in channels reaching your target audience, because you will have to fight with food ads, you will have to fight with travel ads, you will have to fight with pregnancy ads, you will have to fight with mediclaim ads if you are selling a laptop. Now, that is the kind of attention division that is happening in consumers' minds today. And that fractionalization of interest and attention is something every brand is grappling with, which is what is also your trouble and your fight as well. Now, there are certain resource constraints and opportunities here available. Financial resources are the first, because budgets ultimately align with the company resources to begin with. That's the first challenge you have. Second part is creative resources, because the quality of creative execution affects the required amount of spending to push your communication through. The efficiency of the media choice that you have here, strategic media planning can stretch your limited budgets, but there is again a limit to the kind of stretch that can happen. Then you've got partnership opportunities, where co-marketing can extend your reach with shared costs with another partner brand. And if you have internal capabilities, in-house resources may reduce the external spending needs, because agencies will charge a fee. So, if you have capabilities in-house, then you can knock this one out. So, all of these factors create the pathway to your spends and the way your spending decision is really going to be taken. Now, communication again is a perspective, and that perspective is something we've discussed in short before. And organizationally, you have to again make this mindset shift within the management and decision makers, whether to see it as an investment versus whether to see it as an expense. Now, then in the short term accounting view, let's say when a company spends $5 million on advertising to launch a new product, accounting rules typically require writing of the entire cost in the first year. And this is because of the accounting system is why the mindset also shifts. It reduces the reported profit despite the long-term benefits this investment may generate. Now, capital investment comparison. Now, in contrast, if a $5 million investment in capital equipment would be treated as a 5-year depreciable assets. So, this is a lack from the accounting methodology side, which actually treats communication as an expense. And only 1/5 of the cost is written off in the first year, despite potentially offering similar long-term returns. And in terms of brand equity building, your machinery will not create brand equity, but your communication definitely will, or it can also erode it if you do it wrong. But then a portion of communication spending should be viewed as an investment in building brand equity and customer loyalty. These are assets that generate returns over multiple years, but are never captured on balance sheets. So, that is one particular challenge which brands need to clearly understand and so do the accounting principles. And that is where you will increasingly see better returns come in when you do communication if you do it right. So, how do you optimize the communication budget? You prioritize your activities and focus on the highest impact communication activities. You look at the timeline and optimize for the scheduled spending to match your purchase cycles. Then you choose the channel mix and you optimize across channels for better and maximize your efficiency, and you see how much marginal return is optimized. You allocate until your returns equal other marketing investments. Until that time, you are getting better returns, keep spending on marketing communications. So, the overarching principle here for communication is that the marginal profit for every communication dollar spent should be greater or equal to the marginal profit from dollar spent on any other marketing activities. And this requires a sophisticated analysis of ROI across different marketing activities, guiding just how much to spend, also where and when to allocate these resources. All of it requires a very deep kind of analytics. So, the key takeaways for communication planning are that there are three key decisions you must think of. First, the focus of communications, where it needs to be, when it needs to be, how you need to plan for it, the kind of benchmarking, the kind of objective setting, and the budget which will actually see it through. So, all these factors are things you have to think of. And in terms of budget variation, you can look to about 30%, which can be your budget variation in this case. This is a typical range as percentage of sales across industries, which we come to know. You can have even 7 plus budget factors, which are critical considerations which influence your optimal amounts of spending. And therefore, there is only one best approach where you put objective and task budgeting and it aligns your resources with the actual organizational or branding goals that you have to finally reach where you want it to be. Effective communication, therefore, requires an integrated approach. It has to set the objectives, it has to establish the benchmarks, and it has to determine the budgets. And the process begins with clearly defining whether the focus is on creating awareness, building preference, or inciting action. These specific quantitative and temporal benchmarks make these objectives actionable and metricized so that you can actually measure the results. Budgeting should therefore follow an objective and task approach, considering that there are unique factors affecting your brand and your current marketing situation. And whilst you are doing all of these things, there will be shifts. There will be responses from the market. There will be volatility because of policy. And so, definitely, you have to keep your VUCA radar on and keep considering whatever shifts are happening in the market very, very closely. So, with this, we come to an end of this two-part mini series. And next, we'll pick up a very key component of communication as we move deeper into the subject. So, target audience definition and crafting the communication messaging is the next most important part. So, this is where we'll move forward together. So, until that time, this is me signing off.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I'm not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I'm also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism is more damaging than the one which is a marvelous storyteller, provided has told him the story earlier. This piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it's true. Plays contain, they are all written using pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.